Hello and welcome back to Processing the Process, where we capture and discuss the technical, psychological, and contextual dynamics that shape the process of creating a work of art. Week by week, moment by moment, we've been following Jonathan Riddell, choreographer and artistic director of Riddell Dance Theater, as he delves into new creative ventures. Today will be our May 2019 update. And as we update you on Jonathan's artistic endeavors since our last videocast in March, we're going to really focus on his interior landscape, his feelings, insights, growth that are inextricably linked with his unfolding creative process in multiple genres. Starting with the process of working on his music. John, as you continue to develop as a lyricist, musical composer, and vocal performer, that sounds nice. Your typical generation, I know, right? Your typical generation of creative ideas seems to be almost in overdrive. And it sounds exhilarating. Except that contextual dynamics and realities can transform that excitement into frustration when you don't have enough time to investigate and flesh out your ideas.
Yep.
And I thought that your recent description of this situation is really evocative. You said, it's like the animal inside me wants to break out.
Yes, well, and it can feel like my creative beast is circling in its cage, but it's also like the project themselves, or the songs themselves are little creatures like desperate to hatch.
Yes.
And when there's not quite enough time to nurture them, it can be very frustrating. They beg for time. They demand it. They're just like little children, and
Sure.
and then I get all these crazy feelings. I get impatient. I feel guilty, and then. And I can get down on myself too, because I'm thinking like, oh, I'm not achieving what I should be achieving.
Right.
But I'm learning to breathe through that and kind of just identify that, and then at the same time, not just sort of suppress it and shrug it off, but say, okay, well, what would make you feel better that you can do? So like right now, some of the new songs I'm working on, and we'll talk about those more in depth, but I'm working on them lyrically a lot, like just on my phone, on notes, like just jotting down ideas, because that at least feels like steps towards the creative process, which of course it is, but what I want to be doing is sitting down for an hour or 2 or 10 in front of my computer and really working on the music and the lyrics together and figuring it all out and really sussing out a song so that I have something to play for people. I have to embrace the idea that, okay, it's going to take more time spread out over time, but that doesn't mean I have to just stop 100%, and I can do these take these little baby steps and have those kind of feed me along. So throughout my day right now, I'm just, any spare minute I have, I'm thinking about lyrics and clicking away, and then I'm trying to become adept at switching my hats back to being a dad, being a dance teacher, being, all of those things, so that I don't, so that I fend off the frustration and still do all of those things well.
And as we'll see, he has managed to do what he has said. He's accomplished a tremendous amount and doing all of it well. And first, let's take a look at the live musical performance component. Now, open mic nights at Lucy's in Pleasantville have really become Jonathan's platform for his live performance process. An arena in which he can test and figure out things about performing the songs on his World Run Red album in front of a live audience. Gradually, organically, he's fleshing out characterization for each song. He's figuring out how and when to move while singing, figuring out how close he needs to be to the mic, refining his sound quality, discovering new facets of each song as he performs them live. So he's found also that he can focus on the details prior to a performance and then let it all go and allow it to come together on stage, which is clearly a great thing. And these open mics are really giving John an opportunity to learn all about live performance in the moment and discover ways in which performing live differs from recording in the studio. And friends join John each time he's there, offering encouragement and support. And so he's growing increasingly comfortable and confident with each open mic performance. So John, can you compare and contrast your experience recording an album versus performing live?
Yes, it's subtle, but there's different techniques involved in I am discovering that there are different techniques involved.
Exactly.
Other, trained singers and experienced singers certainly know this already, but for example, when I recorded these songs, I'm able to sing more quietly, sort of more intimately into the microphone, and that's how those songs were really developed. Now I'm trying to perform them live, and I realize that even with a microphone in a club setting, in a bar setting, you have to project a lot more. You have to be just yourself a lot louder. At least that's what I'm finding. Certainly I could ask them to just crank the mic up and still whisper into the microphone, but I don't know, there needs to be more of a balance. What I'm pleasantly figuring out too, though, is how to still deliver all the finesse with volume, and that's fun. It's also a little more liberating because what the vocal training I had years ago back when I was much younger, it coincides with that a lot more. So I feel a little bit more natural it feels better to use my whole body and sing with projection, and to give these songs power, even when in the subtle, quiet moments. And the fact that I'm gaining confidence too, that my voice sounds good doing that. Right. I don't only appreciate my voice when I'm delivering a character and it's quiet and it's growling and all these little subtle details that I really enjoyed developing recording the album. I'm like, oh, it also sounds good with some real vibration, some real power to the voice, and I have that to at least some degree. So I'm getting more comfortable and excited about using that.
So what is it like for you when you're up there on that stage with the music that you have composed and you're performing? What is that experience like?
It's just awesome. I'm in heaven when I'm up there, and it's not without some nerves and some fear
Oh, yeah.
and mustering up the courage. Even still, even the more I do it, then the more comfortable I get. Then there's new challenges.
Exactly.
They either pop up in the moment, or they're challenges I put before myself, ways I want to push myself. But man, it's like it's very freeing. It's very liberating, and to know that the very small audiences that I've performed in front of so far that have been very receptive and very enthusiastic, and that feels really good too.
That's wonderful. And as of the fourth open mic performance, John had performed 6 of the songs from World Run Red live. Mm-hmm. And to do this, he had to prepare the electronic tracks for live performance. So, in order to do the remaining 4 songs on World Run Red, he needs to do the same type of preparation, and that involves making a variety of artistic choices. For example, deciding whether he's going to sing the melody line or the harmony line, along with the music that's coming through from the computer. And because these open mic nights occur really late on Monday nights, it's really hard to motivate to go out. So how do you push through the fatigue and make yourself go?
Having a friend come with me is huge. And right now I have one particular friend who's been pretty dedicated and coming with me every week. And so really it's like there's a lot of aspects where I'm like, okay, I'm excited to practice this, to try out this tonight. I'm excited to perform this song tonight. Okay, but then there's the parts of you that are like, but I just don't want to go out, or I just don't want to sit there and wait by myself. But when I think of, well, I'm going out with my friend tonight, and just leave it at that. Then that's better. At least for me, that's fun and exciting, and so that helps motivate me. There has been some weeks where no one's available to come with me, and I have to say I then take that as like, okay, this will be a week where I practice, or this will be a week where I just work on some songs, and I haven't mustered up the drive to go by myself yet. I think that's coming. I think that's a bridge I just have to cross. But like, I have to be honest. It's like I've got so much else going on, and I've got my family and my kids, and so there's certainly plenty I'm doing and getting done. It's not for any lack of ambition with the rest of my life. But so I say, well, if I can't have a friend there with me, I'm going to wait this week out. So.
And that's okay.
And that's okay for now.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he is doing with his music is collaborating with a sound designer.
Yeah.
And that has been an attempt by John to bring his work up to the next level, collaborating with a sound designer and composer who has agreed to work on all of the songs from World Run Red. So, John, what do you perceive as the advantages of using a sound designer versus your already wonderful production?
Thank you. Well, I think I have to say, I think I've done a very good job of creating these songs on the program that I have with no training. My art experience in other fields is giving me, a lot of information and a lot of leg up there. But I'm not a professional sound mixer in particular at all, and that's what I've come to this guy for, is particularly mixing the songs with a lot more finesse and experience and creativity. And just quickly, sound mixing is how you set the levels of different instruments in terms of volume, in terms of how they come through the speakers, the left speaker versus the right speaker, and setting the equalization so that they resonate more in the low in the bass or higher in the treble, and all of those different ranges create high, low, right, left, forward, and back. And so you can actually, to the ear, place the instruments in space in a way. And you can separate instruments and bring them together and put the voice in the middle or to the front or in the background. And it creates a very powerful effect when done well. So I really thought that having someone who really understood the nuances of that work on my tracks would make them sound just that much more professional, perhaps radio ready, so.
I loved the expression you used, that he's really curating your sound.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that really captured it nicely, and brings to mind all kinds of other artistic genres where that curation process occurs. So
and he's also he's also adding effects, distortion effects, things like that, some echoing, things like that, where he feels it would enhance the effect of the song. And so there is even more to what he's doing than just moving things around. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing because it's still my songs. All of those things are my choices, and they're all still there, but he can really change a lot, to the point where the song could even shift from a rock genre over to an even more dance electronic genre, through the effects he puts on it. And so it's been fascinating to delve into that process with him.
So how did it feel when you first heard the first song that he did?
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. And but again, it wasn't just one thing. Definitely the most positive, wonderful thing was I was just like, oh my goodness, it just sounds so professional. And again, I think I did a very good job. I certainly, I would call what I created to still be demos, but I think they sound like very good demos.
Oh, yes.
But but he makes it sound, again, sort of professional, ready to be distributed. And then again, there's all this sort of finesse and tweaking that he's done, which again shift things a little bit that I'm not used to hearing. So that always will trigger some sort of surprised response, be it pleasant surprise or be it nervous surprise or scared surprise. And even what those reactions are, you have to let yourself mull it over. You have to let yourself sort of stew and think about it. Some things that you might love immediately, you give further thought to and go, oh, but maybe that shifts things too much. Let's change that back. Or things that you initially go, whoa, what was that? Then suddenly you fall in love with, so I'm in this stage right now where I'm getting used to what I hear. But I do know that what I hear is great, and it is an elevation of my work. And so yeah, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to be working with him.
Well, that's a nice segue into the next segment in which Jonathan is in the process of creating even more new songs. So let's take a look at those new songs you're creating, focusing on the various components of your process and how you experience that process.
Mm-hmm.
First is an instrumental song that John thought might serve as an interlude, a transition piece between two songs on World Run Red. And John, you shared with me that it is both dissonant and meditative, agitated and stormy, and paradoxically offering a sense of progression as well as staying in one place. Interesting. And as we've frequently noted, when you change one piece, all the rest of the pieces begin to shift. So by including this interlude, you may change the order of the second half of the album.
Yes. Oh boy. Yeah, that's a can of worms.
Right.
So yeah, I love this instrumental piece that I made, and I call it the churning C, churning with a CH. And like you said, it does have this feeling of progression, and yet a lot like impressionistic music. It also feels like it just sort of shimmers in one place. And the churning sea seems like a very appropriate title for that.
Right.
The idea that like there's all of this motion, but at the same time it's churning over on itself. It's not taking you on a journey from New York to Paris. It's the ocean in between New York and Paris. But it does. It adds sort of an element to the storyline, perhaps where the character gets to take a step back and think for a while and turn these ideas in his mind. It could serve as a transition from one emotional state to another, or an intensification. Is that a word?
Mm-hmm.
An intensifying of emotions. So it could take you from an angry song to like a really violent song, or it. So it has that ability, and I'm trying to figure out. I am trying to figure out then its place. I could use it in so many different places on the album, though. I have a feeling. Well, I'll just tell you then the story of like the at least 20 or 30 different iterations of song order I have played around with, and this then sort of drummed that all up again. And I think, though, this is a sidebar, it inspired me to make some changes actually in particularly a song, my song One Mistake. It sort of inspired in me a slight shift in the song's sound and how to make it even more powerful. And I have what I'm feeling now is that with those changes in place, and in the right order, I don't need the instrumental on the album anymore.
Isn't that interesting?
And I think the instrumental could work well on my next album. So that may be where it ends up, which is appropriate because I have knitted up the album and to be the 10 songs, but isn't it wonderful that this creative process allowed me to enhance one of those songs even more and really be even happier with World Run Red as I have it.
So it's so interesting then that this interlude served as a catalyst for propelling John forward in new directions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even more now than in the past, you felt free to keep tweaking your songs to improve their quality, recognizing that, hey, this is your artistic growth process fueled by continual learning, especially in this music genre.
Yeah.
And the second song is a new song for yet another album, which started with a draft of lyrics and a sketch of musical ideas, including rhythm and melodic possibilities. Tell us about this song.
Gosh, where did this song come from? So, going back to the process that I enjoy of playing around with loops and samples and finding letting a song come from there. I started to do that with a couple different tracks, and this one sort of seemed to be ready soonest for some melody and lyrics. And what I can't remember what the very first idea was for the lyrics, but I just had this notion of being in an ejector seat, and the song is called Ejector Seat, and it describes a complicated character, and there's different interpretations of what's really happening, but I see him as sitting in this seat, desperate to push the button, and for some reason he hasn't yet. And it could simply be that he's about to do it, and at the end of the song he will, or are there things holding him back? Is he truly scared to do it, or are his hands tied by life, by relationships, and So I think that's interesting and a little mysterious, and I like that. And I like that it also describes just this sort of need to escape. And again, it's he sort of speaks about it as if it's very empowering, but I think then as he sort of gives a little more context for where he is, you sort of wonder, oh, is he escaping because he's damaged, or because he's scared of what's coming, you know? So is this good escape? Is this progress and getting out of a bad situation, or is this someone like not facing the issues that they have, you know? So, gosh, all of that, all of that, and it's so fun to think about and mull over, and I love the image of this chair being a possible liberator or a possible, you know, cage, or, you know, something he's strapped into. Is he strapped into because it's a trapping device, or is he strapped in because he's about to go on a journey? And we're kind of not sure.
You'll have to see. And you mentioned that in thinking about this second album in particular, and with this song, that yes, you still have the darkness, the edginess, the sexiness, but that positive emotions are starting to creep in.
Yeah, well, I want to play with how to talk about some happier topics. And still keep a dark edge to them. I think that's me, and I think that's life, and I think that's how I see life a little bit sometimes. And and so like I said, the dichotomy of ejector seat is an example of that, because I get to say things like, I want to dive into the sun and believe. I get to say those lyrics, which sound so hopeful, and then but also get to explore the notion of, but am I diving into oblivion? Is that heaven, or is that death? Like in death and darkness, like, and so yeah, it's sort of enriching to get to say some really beautiful things, and yet sort of consider the flip side still, and stay connected to both.
I mean, you're essentially, I think throughout your career this is the case, but exploring the full range of internal emotional experience.
Yeah. Trying to.
From many different angles.
It's the goal.
It's the goal, and doing it well, and we'll see more of that in yet another new song that John wrote, or still in the, we should always say still in the process of tweaking, I think. Lady Jade.
Oh,
Tell
yeah,
us about
that's
this. Very interesting.
So
Process.
this has been a long process, and this one still isn't done. I feel like ejector seat, I'm pretty wrapped on what that is now, and that was a process. But Lady Jade, Lady Jade to me is feeling similar to. Well, first of all, I wanted to write a song that was sort of a follow-up to Amethyst, which was just a snarling, sexy song, and the chorus of that is, "This crown ain't big enough for the both of us," and all of a sudden this other chorus popped into my head of, "I'm gonna take my throne, I'm gonna go on home," and I thought, oh, cool! Like if I use that, like I have like two sister songs here, and this idea of something regal and empowering, and but it being used in this tumultuous as sort of a tool in this tumultuous relationship. So that's where that initially came from. So then I started to think about, okay, so these are maybe the relationship is parallel to kids on a playground, and the notion of like, I'm taking my stuff and I'm leaving that, like I'm taking my toys and I'm leaving the sandbox. You don't play fair. And in doing that, I realized like, I kind of needed an inspiration for a story, and I have a friend who's a drag queen, and her name is Ms. Jade. Hi, Ms. Jade. You're awesome. And I had actually used the name Lady Jade in a verse of Amethyst that I wound up cutting, and so I was like, well, maybe this now is an opportunity to bring Lady Jade back and give her a whole song. So I kind of was inspired by just the sass and attitude of my friend, who's a very like strong and empowered and beautiful person, and then I concocted this completely fictional story about some relationship that Lady Jade has, and then it goes badly because the guy like turns out to be a dog, and it's that old story. But as I started to explore the character, I realized like, oh, I do want to say some pretty adult things, so maybe the kids on the playground vibe is not quite right. And so I thought, oh, but if I still talk about games, like, and the fact that this guy is playing games, that would make someone want to take their stuff and leave. So you still get that. And I started thinking, oh, well, what if, Lady Jade, she's a queen and all this stuff. I was like, oh, what if I use card game and gambling metaphors? And so she's the queen and he's the jack, and he's but he winds up being a joker, but she thought he was a king. Like, so that there's all these different references to cards and hearts and spades and diamonds and then different plays, and it's been really fun exploring that whole world of metaphor and making it playful and fun. But of course it's very complex to put all of those elements together in a story that then has like an emotional climax, because I'm very demanding. I can't just write a song that's just happy chorus, whatever. Well, I did with Amethyst. That's a little more. Well, no, that has complexity in it too. Anyway, this is even and more. And we'll see. I'm also the chorus is also. It has a bit of like a angry rap vibe, which I think can be very rock and roll and still very me. I'm bumping up against sort of a genre and identity crisis, because I don't want to fall into I don't want Rubber Skulls to try and rap. I don't want that. Just because I don't feel empowered to do that. So I'm having to check myself in terms, like, as I get kind of more playful, it starts to sound very like this rockin' guy is trying to go R&B rap, and it's just that's failing. So that's a trapping I'm trying to stay away from. So there's a lot I'm dealing with, and I'm close. I'm very close to the end of this song, to a point where I'm happy with it. We'll see. We're gonna see.
You also had what reminded me a little bit of the questions narratively in Ejector Seat. Is it this or might it be that? It arose here as well, and you were wondering about about what your character was thinking and deciding to do, and did that really make sense, and what was really going on here?
Yeah, because it's like it's so interesting how it evolves, because I want to tell like the first part of the story, which is the two characters meeting, but then to go into the chorus, which is, I'm going to take my throne and go on home. Clearly, some altercation has to happen to prompt the main character to say that, and yet it can't be such a definite, well, I'm leaving, that then she leaves and then the story's over. Right. There's still like 4 more verses to go. So that's a really delicate pacing of the story I'm trying to do. And it's like, okay, so then does she forgive him for another verse, and then he messes up again? So then she says, like, and then is that just the pattern, and is that going to be boring by the end of the song? So is there like then a different way? And so then I thought, and what if she winds up being pregnant in the middle of so then it's like, and then that's incentive to stay, but then he messes that up. It's just like, it's as if I'm writing like this novel, just to get a 4-minute song. So we'll see.
Wow, what a process. Exactly. Yeah. And now shifting gears into another genre, but as we know, so many similarities across genres in terms of John's process. But as you may recall from our last videocast, John was setting Jose Limon's masterpiece Psalm on
changing gears
on the Purchase Dance Company, and he had begun to speak about the experience of doing so, working with the BFA students at Purchase for their spring concert, And this particular concert took place at the beginning of May. So, thinking retrospectively, John, how would you describe your experience of the actual show?
Of the actual show. I was very happy opening night. The process was pretty darn great throughout, and I thought the kids worked really hard overall, and particularly the soloists had the opportunity to really put a lot of heart and soul into what they were doing, and they did that. So I was very happy, and it all came together opening night, and the live. There were so many components to it with live music, and not just any old live music, but orchestra and choir, and a huge cast of dancers, almost twice as many as we often dance the piece with, and that of course that could be daunting, but particularly my partner in crime, Kristen Foote, who did most of the staging of the ensemble, did such a great job in moving these masses of bodies and like waves crashing and through these brilliant formations. So to me that was such a treat to see, and it's so exciting. And the audience response was fantastic, and all of the faculty and directors of the school were so complimentary. So it just felt really, it felt very well supported throughout, and well supported right through the show, and appreciated, and that really empowered Kristen and I to do what I thought was a really good job.
Absolutely.
It was nice. It's nice to do a good job because you're supported, not because you're fighting through lack of support or something, or through, tons of struggles. It's like, oh, this is going well, so let's keep going. Let's keep the momentum going and push it. So.
That's an interesting segue into my next question, because I imagine it's always tricky when you restage an iconic work by a very famous, infamous choreographer in this case. And I know that this time your restaging experience was significantly different from the restagings you've done in the past. Can you explain why and how your thinking has evolved?
You're speaking sort of emotionally?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's interesting. I think that, again, the support was a big factor. But also my receptivity to that support. I mean, I've certainly been supported throughout my career, but I'm in a much more appreciative place. I feel like I've let go of a lot of sort of more competitive feelings, which I felt when I was in much more entrenched in the dance world, and it's competition that, yes, to some degree comes from other people, but it's much more you competing with yourself, or competing with standards that either are very, very high unto themselves, or you are even thinking are higher than they are, or you're trying to push them even higher. You want to do even better than what the standards are, and it's definitely tricky with an iconic piece, a famous piece, a time-tested, beautiful piece, because those pieces have already been seen by so many people. They've and if you're again deep in the world, then you know other people who have directed the piece. You know other people who have danced the piece. They know it inside and out and intimately, and at the same time, they know the version that they did, or they know the choices that they made, and they may have a bias towards that, and so then they're judging your work against that bias, which is a little unfair, but it's also human. And what's also human is the we don't always realize the expectations we walk into a performance with. So because I've staged Psalm before, and I was staging it this time, it's almost impossible to see the piece completely fresh. I try to sort of meditate and prepare myself to see the piece as freshly as I can each time I see it, and to not judge it on past things. But it's almost impossible. It's like your brain just isn't wired to do that. You're looking at it and you're immediately just comparing it, or you're saying, oh, this part's going to happen now. Oh, it didn't quite. Oh, there it happened. And that gives you a weird sort of jostle and a disconnect. So to all of my peers out there who saw the show, I just want to say, I hope you were open, and I thank you for being open. And but if you weren't open, sorry, there's nothing I can do about it. And you just gotta use the F word and say F it, and just, this is what it is. And
whatever.
And so I also tried to take those expectations off the table to me,
right.
to bring it all full circle. Like, how is this different? I was like, well, this is going to be what it is, and Kristen and I are going to just direct the hell out of this piece and push the heck out of it, and do the best we can, and we are completely capable of doing a great job, and that's what we did, and so then whatever people see or walk away with is I can't control that.
And you also, as usual, always recognize the contextual elements that are present, well, with anything that we do, of course, but that impact the process of that restaging inevitably.
Yeah.
Wherever you're doing it, under whatever circumstances. And I think, as we always talk about, of course, in the Videocasts, context is everything.
It is, and yeah, and so this is definitely the acknowledgement of that. Again, when that's a really tough concept when it comes to performance, particularly live performance, because live performance happens and then it's done, and it was what it was, and it's almost as if, at least in our thinking, for everything leading up to the performance stops, and you put it all aside, you do the performance, which hopefully is liberating and extraordinary, and then the performance ends and you go on with your life. So it almost feels like this world without context. It almost feels like this little bubble where nothing else matters. And we get, as performers, we're so trained and prepared to think that way and execute the piece that way, and live in that sort of perfect moment. You hope it's perfect. If it's not perfect, then you're absolutely devastated and crushed, because that was your one bubble of opportunity to have it be perfect. And that's what we're up against, is this sort of utter denial of context. Utter denial of context, and to the point where that's glorified. But then you gotta be real, and you have to live your life, and you have to be forgiving and celebratory of what did go well, and it's a real mind game.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge. But again, what was different this time was me really saying, John, you know the context of what this is, and throughout your artistic life, I've always gone into the performance saying, well, this is going to be what it is, and at the same time, I have to forgive myself my past sins and my future sins, and that is what it is. But I don't know, it became really difficult to do that for a while in my life, and I'm doing that a lot more now. That forgiveness and that just pushing it as far as it can be pushed, and then being happy with it.
And really, I think more and more working to stay authentic and grounded in your own authentic self. And I think that actually informs our last segment of the Videocast, which is your choreographing with Mandy. And in the previous Videocast, you and Mandy had just begun to get together and start considering possible ways of collaborating moving forward. So can you share with us what you guys have begun to do, and what may be happening moving forward?
Yeah, well, quite specifically, I'm working on, I put air quotes around a new solo. It's new in that it hasn't been finished yet, but it's one I started last year on myself. But now I realize, and I started to work on it with Lisa Yanacito McBride a little bit, but then that got truncated. So I'd like to start working on that again, and it's you and I have nicknamed it the graveyard solo, because in my mind it takes place in a graveyard, and it's a complement to Lisa's Lemon Grove solo. So it's almost as if her solo in this Lemon Grove ends, maybe there's a shift in lighting, and that same dancer, a different dancer could come on, they could switch places, or that same dancer could simply turn around and begin this solo, which is sort of the darker side of the coin. So Mandy has agreed to work on that with me, and we're making some good progress on it.
Well, interestingly, within the context of your work with Mandy, a number of conflicting impulses and needs are surfacing for you. So I thought that I would summarize each one and then have John sort of flesh it out a little bit. And this is what I think I meant a little bit ago when I talked about your being grounded in your authentic self. And sometimes it's hard to know, which of these impulses, in fact, are truly right. What is, how do I evaluate this information? It's not always so easy, and I think we'll see that play out here. So, the first question is, in John's mind, is should he maintain the looser, more laid-back environment that has actually characterized your work with Mandy during your time in Second Story, or do you take a more professional, structured approach that is a little bit more similar to what it was like when you were working professionally in your own company, and then prior to that with Limon?
Yeah, well, I feel like we kind of go back and forth, and it's sort of how we feel day to day. So very laid back, I would say. It has to be laid back. There have been a couple times where I've sort of come in sort of very prepared and excited and said, okay, like I'll lead the warm-up today and we'll get it through in 30 minutes and then we'll get to work. And Mandy's open to that and she follows my lead. And that's great. And then there are other weeks where I'm just like, hey, I just dealt with X, Y, and Z situation. I've been doing this throughout the week. So let's just be a little chill, which is fine, which is absolutely fine for us. I think the only thing that I don't love about that is that we don't then have that sort of kick in the pants to like really make progress, really move. I always just want things to move more and move faster. But I think even if they moved at neck break speed, I'd be like, okay, good, and more. But if I, it's kind of, I mean, yes, it's up to Mandy and I, but really just speaking for myself, it's really up to me. If I want to push her, she will follow. If I don't, there are days where she pushes, where she's very excited to get going. So I don't know what to say. We're being laid back. We do always get. I gotta say this though. Even on our most laid back days, we always will get like just that little chunk done, yes. And then afterwards we're like, oh, that was really productive. That was good. I'm glad we did that. And maybe that's just fine. Again, we don't have a goal right now, so we're kind of just taking it week by week. And if we had a performance goal, both of our gears would kick right in, and we would do it. So.
It remains to be seen.
Yeah.
Don't know yet.
Remains to be seen. We're playing.
Playing with it back and forth. Another question in John's mind is, should he choreograph works to suit Mandy's style or create in a way that is authentic to him and then coach Mandy to learn to move in a way that's similar to John?
Yeah. Sort of where I'm arriving with that, now that we're sort of in the middle of it, I'm definitely inspired by Mandy, and so I'm trying to just sort of incorporate those inspirations into the work, but I've realized like I definitely have to make the solo from me, from my movement. I don't have the tools. I suppose if I really sat down and thought about it and used sort of devices that I know, that I've learned from other choreographers, that I've used in the past, where I was sort of giving her directions or ideas and she was coming up with the movement, more than that would be much more of John creating something in Mandy's style, because from her body is coming a lot of the concrete movements. Like I'm giving her ideas and maybe I'm telling her no, go right instead of left, but she's really deciding what the movement is. But if I'm deciding what the movement is, it has to feel good to me. It has to be my musicality. Right. Because it's as if my brain is my body, and that's just how I work. And when I've tried to put on somebody else's brain, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't make sense to me. So then I'm looking at, like, maybe I like some of the movement choices, but I'm looking at the musicality or the initiation or the dynamics, and I'm just going, but it just doesn't make sense. It's just disconnecting, and it's sort of too difficult to comb through all that. It's like, okay, let's stop. Let me just make up the movement, and then I'll coach you, and so that's kind of where we're at, and at the same time, another element that I'm going to add into this conversation is and maybe we've talked about this before, but I'm also freeing up my movement vocabulary for this.
Yes.
Again, with brittle branches, I was very controlled about what movements they did, what sort of choices I let into the piece. And here I'm being, it's funny because this piece is still very slow and evolving, but when it gets to places of more quickness and I'm allowing for a lot more freedom of choice within me. So that's kind of exciting to sort of feel like I'm going back to that a little bit.
That was more
like it's exciting to go in a new direction. Yeah, going back to something more characteristic of things I've done in the past, which you never want to copy yourself, but after you've gone in a new direction for a while, it's nice to come home. It's like coming home. So I think what you'll see in this piece is actually a mix. You'll see a mix of new Jonathan and some old. We'll see what that's like.
We'll see what that looks like. Another question is that Graveyard, as we're calling it, was conceived a while ago when John was deeply immersed in very powerful, painful emotions. And John, you've talked about wanting to finish the whole, what I call a sweet suite of grief, but you've wondered, should I continue to work on it now that psychologically I'm in a different place?
Yeah, and contextually in a different place. I've decided to work on it because, of course, those feelings are still there, and I can still access them quite easily, and because I want to finish this. I want this solo to be done, and this is the last piece solo within a larger suite. And when I do that, this whole suite will be done, and that's exciting. It feels weird to say I want to finish this just so it can be finished, but I feel like I'm still doing plenty of in-depth exploration that it's it's deserving of that. So so that's why I've decided to keep working on this. But what has changed for me is, I'm farther away from the grief of that time, and I would like to be exploring happier things. Even if I am lighter feeling in rehearsals, I still have to go to those darker and sad places for this piece, or this piece simply just evokes that in me. So it's it's a bit of a challenge because I want to be moving on, and it feels a little bit like, I'm revisiting the past, but that's kind of what the piece is about, so it seems appropriate, and it seems like I'm getting some great ideas because of that struggle. So maybe that's what the piece is about, is wanting to move on, but sort of being haunted.
Well, might that really come down to processing, and that we are always processing? It's a lifetime kind of journey.
Mm-hmm.
So we just process in different ways, I think, as time goes on. And I think that allows us to continue to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And as we've discussed a lot, John, and I think we have on the Videocast as well, that we make meaning retrospectively. So at any given point on that continuum, time-wise, the meaning that you're going to make of what occurred here is going to continually shift.
Mm-hmm.
And so theoretically, the work that you do could, you could revisit it over time, and that too would shift because of those, different kinds of perspectives and coming at it a different kind of way and making different kind of meaning of it. So, but it sounds like you've found a way to reconcile that dilemma, enough to start to explore and see what happens.
Yeah.
And finally, John wants to be able to express his ideas about character, emotional landscape, and backstory from the very beginning of the process. But, as we've seen, and he really knows that these elements will likely change as the process unfolds. And John, your typical process, I know, is to begin with a general vision, general arc, and then collaboratively flesh it out over time.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your thinking about that? Do you put it out there in the beginning and the dancers know that the process will take it in different places?
Well, Mandy and I had a couple sessions now where I was a lot more open with her about what the piece is about. And it was very good. It was, she responded right away. She moved differently. She made different choices. And so I think that's great. The last rehearsal or two have been much more academic, like we're just trying to come up with the movement and the exact timing and stuff, and we haven't gotten to her going for a run through of anything yet, so we haven't talked about that in a little while, but I think it helps. I think anytime you're vulnerable, it with people, they do connect and they do respond, and whereas sometimes I hold it back on purpose because I just want to focus on the counts and the shapes and whatever, and we don't need to worry about the drama right now. I then very easily fall into holding that back, which is so bizarre because my work is so emotional and character driven. But for some reason, as the choreographer, I feel like I'm the one that needs to process that. And then, but I do think it's always good to let the dancers in on it and let them begin their process of it right away, rather than closer to showtime.
Because it is a process for all of you. You're all collaborators. Yeah. So it's almost as if by holding it back, you're the only one who gets to process during that period of time in a way.
Yeah.
And then they're kind of catching up on the back end while you're trying to save them from the experience, I guess, of having things continually change, which they do because they do. I mean, that's the nature process, particularly in a collaborative setting. But it sounds like, again, here's another shift towards something that I think really is authentic to you.
Yeah.
So with that, we wrap up our May update, and we will see what happens moving forward in terms of what we do filming wise, as you will continue on in all of these arenas, and truthfully, we could film probably every day and have a tremendous amount of material to cover. So we're not sure what that is going to look like moving forward, but stay tuned, because we are going to be bringing you a very special treat, an artist roundtable, multi-genre, processing the process. So I'm not going to say any more about that just yet, but very, very exciting. Coming up within the next month and a half, 2 months, and we think that it's going to bring a lot of what we've been working on together in a new way. So with that, we thank you once again for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.